"No man wants me," said the fat 18-year-old. Her words echoed down the dusty main street, laughter ringing in her ears. She thought she'd never be wanted, never be loved. Then Boots stepped from the shadows. A scarred mountain man, with fire in his eyes, silenced the mockers. And with one shocking line, he shattered her despair. "You're so beautiful." But beauty on the frontier came with a price. Behind church bells and lamplight, a railroad scheme is closing in, ready to steal her family's land. And when fists fly, jail doors slam, and a secret ally steps forward, the fight for dignity becomes more dangerous than anyone imagined. What will this young woman risk to prove her worth? And will the man who called her beautiful stand by her side when the entire town turns to watch? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The winter wind whipped down Main Street, rattling the storefront signs of Dry Creek as dusk settled over the rail-stopped town. Inside Whitaker's general store, warmth from the potbelly stove drew a crowd of townsfolk seeking refuge from the bitter cold. The scent of coffee and tobacco mingled with the sharp smell of leather and wool as people stamped snow from their boots. Gianna Haskins kept her eyes down, focusing on her mother's shopping list as she gathered supplies, flour, coffee, sugar, and lamp oil. Her mittened hands trembled slightly as she reached for the items, aware of the whispers and sideways glances that followed her movements through the store. The bell above the door jangled as 3 cowhands stomped in, bringing a gust of frigid air with them. Their spurs clinked against the wooden floor as they made their way to the stove, and Gianna's shoulders tensed at their approach. She recognized them as hands from the Circle Bar Ranch, troublemakers who seemed to take particular delight in tormenting those they deemed lesser than themselves. "Well, if it ain't the biggest filly in Colorado territory," drawled the tallest one, Tom Rollins, loud enough for everyone to hear. His companions snickered, and Gianna's cheeks burned as she tried to make herself smaller behind a stack of feed sacks. "Reckon it'd take 2 horses just to carry her to church," added another, causing several onlookers to chuckle. The sound of their laughter felt like needles against Gianna's skin. She clutched her basket closer, the items inside rattling as her hands shook. The store suddenly felt too small, too crowded, the air too thick to breathe. "Mr." Whitaker busied himself behind the counter, pretending not to hear, while other customers found sudden interest in examining merchandise on distant shelves. "Ain't that right, Miss Haskins?" Rollins pressed, stepping closer. "Must be why you're still unwed at your age. Can't find a man strong enough to court you properly." The words struck deep, hitting every fear and doubt that kept Gianna awake at night. Her eyes stung with unshed tears as she tried to move past them toward the counter, but they shifted to block her path. "No man wants me," Gianna blurted out, her voice cracking. "Not one." The admission hung in the frosty air like smoke, followed by another round of cruel laughter. The bell above the door chimed again, but Gianna barely noticed, too consumed by her shame and humiliation. Then a deep voice cut through the mockery, steady and clear as a church bell. "That's enough." The laughter died away as Michael Hale stepped forward from the edge of the boardwalk. His tall frame filled the doorway, shoulders dusted with snow, a Winchester rifle slung across his back. A long scar traced down one side of his weathered face, and his dark eyes fixed on the cowhands with the intensity of a mountain lion sizing up its prey. "Mr. Hale," Rollins managed, his earlier bravado faltering. "We was just having some fun." "Fun?" Michael's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath it. "Looks to me like 3 grown men showing themselves to be no better than schoolyard bullies." He moved further into the store, his boots silent on the wooden floor. "Where I come from, a man who mocks a lady proves himself no man at all." The store had gone completely still. Even Mr. Whitaker stood frozen behind his counter, a coffee scoop suspended in midair. Michael's gaze swept the room, taking in the silent observers. "Miss Haskins," he continued, turning to Gianna, his voice softening, "is a beautiful young woman. Any man would be fortunate to court her, though few would deserve the honor." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, Gianna saw something there besides pity or mockery. Respect. warm, and genuine. The cowhands shifted uncomfortably, but Michael wasn't finished. "Now, I suggest you boys apologize to the lady, then find somewhere else to warm yourselves." Rollins opened his mouth as if to argue, but something in Michael's steady gaze made him think better of it. "Sorry, Miss Haskins," he muttered, not quite meeting her eyes. His companions mumbled similar apologies before all three hurried out into the gathering darkness. The tension in the store broke like ice in spring thaw. People began moving again, talking in low voices, though many cast curious glances at Michael and Gianna. "Mr." Whitaker hurried to ring up Gianna's purchases, his manner suddenly solicitous. "Miss Haskins," Michael said quietly, "might I have the honor of walking you home? These roads can be treacherous after dark." Gianna looked up at him, still stunned by his intervention. In all her 22 years, no one had ever defended her like that. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They stepped out into the winter evening together, their boots crunching in the fresh snow. The street was mostly empty now, with only a few pools of lamplight breaking the purple dusk. Their breath formed white clouds in the air as they walked slowly along the rutted road toward the Haskins homestead. "Thank you," Gianna finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper, "for what you said back there." Michael adjusted his pace to match her shorter stride. "I only spoke the truth, Miss Haskins. Those men needed to hear it, but more importantly, you did." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of snow and the distant whistle of wind through the pines. Gianna stole glances at her companion, wondering at the strange turn her day had taken. She'd seen Michael Hale around town before, of course. Everyone knew of the solitary trapper who lived up in the mountains, but they'd never exchanged more than polite nods. The lights of the Haskins homestead came into view, golden squares in the gathering dark. Smoke rose straight up from the chimney, promising warmth within. As they approached, the front door opened, spilling more light onto the snow. Mrs. Haskins stood in the doorway, her face a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Gianna, is everything all right?" Her mother's eyes darted between her daughter and the tall man beside her. "Yes, Mama," Gianna assured her. "Mr. Hale was kind enough to escort me home. There was some trouble at the store." Mrs. Haskins' brow furrowed, but she managed a polite smile. "Won't you come in, Mr. Hale? The least we can offer is a hot cup of coffee for your trouble." Michael removed his hat, revealing dark hair touched with gray at the temples. "Much obliged, Mrs. Haskins." Inside, the small cabin was warm and bright, scented with the remnants of supper. Mrs. Haskins bustled about, setting out cups and heating coffee on the wood stove while shooting worried glances at her daughter. Gianna hung up her coat and began putting away the supplies, moving with the careful precision of someone trying to keep their hands busy. There was some unpleasantness at Whitaker's, Michael explained quietly to Mrs. Haskins. "Some young men forgot their manners. I merely reminded them of proper behavior." Understanding dawned in Mrs. Haskins' eyes, and she pressed her lips together in a thin line. She'd seen her daughter suffer such treatment before, helpless to prevent it. "Thank you," she said softly, pouring coffee into 3 cups. They sat at the simple wooden table, the atmosphere tense yet oddly polite. Mrs. Haskins asked careful questions about Michael's trapping business, while Gianna remained mostly silent, stealing glances at him when she thought no one was looking. His hands, she noticed, were strong and weathered, but they handled the delicate china cup with surprising gentleness. As the coffee dwindled and the conversation began to lag, Michael rose to take his leave. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Haskins. Miss Gianna." He settled his hat back on his head, nodding to them both. At the door, he paused. "Miss Haskins, if you're willing, I'd be honored to escort you to church this Sunday. That is, if your mother approves." Gianna's heart skipped a beat as she looked to her mother, who hesitated only briefly before nodding. "That would be fine, Mr. Hale." After Michael had gone, Gianna sat by the fireplace, watching the flames dance while her mother cleared away the cups. The words he'd spoken in the store kept repeating in her mind. "Beautiful young woman. Any man would be fortunate. Deserve the honor." She rolled them over and over, like precious stones in her palm, wondering if she dared believe them. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving the world hushed and expectant. Gianna touched her cheek, still warm from more than just the flames, and allowed herself to wonder if perhaps Michael's words might be true after all. Her mother's soft footsteps approached, and then a gentle hand rested on her shoulder. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The quiet moment stretched between them, filled with hope and possibility, as the fire burned low in the winter. Night deepened around their small, warm home. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Haskins homestead. Frost had painted delicate patterns across the window panes overnight, and thin wisps of smoke curled from the chimney into the winter sky. Inside, Gianna stoked the cookstove's dying embers, adding kindling until flames licked at the new wood. "We'd best fetch water before the sun climbs too high," her mother said, already wrapping a thick shawl around her shoulders. "The creek'll only get more treacherous once it starts to thaw." Gianna nodded, pulling on her worn wool coat and taking up one of the wooden buckets. The path to the creek was well-worn but treacherous with ice, requiring careful steps. Their boots crunched through the crusty snow as mother and daughter made their way down the gentle slope. At the creek's edge, they found a thin sheet of ice had formed overnight. Gianna used a sturdy stick to break through, revealing the dark water flowing beneath. The cold bit at her hands as she dipped her bucket, making her fingers ache. "Mind you don't slip," her mother cautioned, working a few feet away. "That water's fierce cold this time of year." They had filled 3 buckets when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both look up. Michael Hale sat astride his bay gelding, leading a loaded pack horse. He dismounted smoothly, touching his hat brim in greeting. "Mrs. Haskins, Miss Gianna," he said, his breath visible in the morning air. "I thought I might repay your hospitality by chopping some wood. Noticed your pile was running low last night." "Mrs." Haskins straightened, one hand pressed to her lower back. "That's right, thoughtful of you, Mr. Hale. We'd be much obliged." "Please, let me carry those for you," Michael offered, moving to take the heavy buckets. His strong hands made light work of what had been a struggle for the women, and he easily managed all 3 buckets on the return trip to the cabin. Once the water was stored, Michael removed his coat and set to work at the chopping block. The steady rhythm of his axe filled the morning air as Gianna and her mother went about their indoor tasks. Through the window, Gianna watched him work, noting how efficiently he split each log, his movements sure and practiced. The morning wore on, and the woodpile grew impressively. When Mrs. Haskins called everyone in for the midday meal, Michael had accomplished more than Gianna and her mother could have managed in a week. Inside, the cabin was warm and fragrant, with the smell of bean soup and cornbread. They settled around the table, and Mrs. Haskins served generous portions. For a while, there was only the quiet sounds of eating, but Gianna noticed her mother's hands trembling slightly as she broke her cornbread. Finally, Mrs. Haskins set down her spoon and folded her hands in her lap. "Mr. Hale," she began, her voice tight with worry. "I feel I should tell you something, seeing as you've been so kind to us." She drew a shaky breath. "We're in some trouble here." Michael set down his cup, giving her his full attention. Gianna felt her throat tighten, knowing what was coming. "The railroad's been pressing claims on land hereabouts," Mrs. Haskins continued. "They mean to put in a spur line and our property." Her voice faltered. "Well, they say it's right where they need to build." Gianna blinked hard against the tears threatening to fall. "They say we don't have proper proof of ownership," she added softly. "Papa always handled the paperwork, but after he passed." She couldn't finish the sentence. Michael's expression grew serious. "When did your husband file the original claim?" he asked Mrs. Haskins. "It would have been 1873, she replied. "Spring, I believe." A thoughtful look crossed Michael's face. "I recall something from my time working as a courier at the county office years back. There was a batch of claim filings from that period. Homestead papers, mineral rights, water access, agreements. I remember because there was some confusion about how they were recorded." He took a slow sip of coffee. "If your husband's claim was among them, there might be a second copy filed under a different system." Hope flickered in Mrs. Haskins' eyes. "You really think there might be?" "I can't say for certain," Michael answered carefully, "but I'd be willing to ride into the county seat and check." Those records should still be there, even if they're buried deep in the old files. We couldn't ask you to, Mrs. Haskins began, but Michael held up a hand. You're not asking. I'm offering. His voice was firm but gentle. Besides, I've seen how the railroad operates. They're not above using underhanded tactics to get what they want. The afternoon passed in a blur of chores and worried conversation. Michael finished the woodpile and helped with several other repairs around the homestead before heading home to prepare for his ride to the county seat the next day. As the sun began to set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. Through the gathering dusk came two riders, one in the distinct uniform of a U.S. Marshal, the other a clerk from the railroad office. They reined up in front of the cabin, and Gianna felt her mother's hand slip into hers, squeezing tight. The marshal dismounted, his spurs jingling as he approached the porch where they stood. Michael stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between the lawman and the women. Evening, Marshal, Michael said evenly. What brings you out this way so late? The marshal reached into his coat and withdrew an official-looking envelope. Just delivering some papers, Mr. Hale. This is railroad business. He turned to Mrs. Haskins. Ma'am, I'm required to inform you that foreclosure proceedings will begin within 30 days unless proof of ownership can be produced to counter the railroad's claim. Mrs. Haskins took the envelope, with trembling fingers, but held her head high. We have such proof, Marshal. It's just a matter of locating it. The marshal's expression remained neutral. Then I suggest you locate it quickly, ma'am. The railroad's lawyers are not known for their patience. He touched the brim of his hat and turned to go, but paused. For what it's worth, I take no pleasure in this part of my duties. The clerk remained silent throughout the exchange, but his satisfied smirk spoke volumes. As they rode away, Gianna felt the first tear break free and roll down her cheek. Michael watched the riders disappear into the gathering darkness before turning back to them. Mrs. Haskins, would you mind if I came inside for a moment? There are some things we should discuss. In the cabin, Gianna lit the lamp while her mother built up the fire. The envelope lay unopened on the table, like a snake coiled to strike. Michael pulled out a chair and sat, his expression thoughtful. The railroad's moving faster than I expected, he said quietly. They must really want this land. He looked at Mrs. Haskins. Do you have any papers at all? Anything your husband might have left? Mrs. Haskins nodded and went to the trunk beneath her bed, returning with a small tin box. Inside were various documents, letters, receipts, and other papers, but nothing that clearly established their claim to the land. Michael examined each document carefully in the lamplight. These might help support our case, but we need that original filing. He looked up at them, his eyes determined. I'll leave for the county seat at first light. The railroad may have friends in high places, but they don't know every secret in those old record books. Gianna watched him study the papers, his strong hands handling the delicate documents with care. The lamplight cast shadows across his scarred face, but she saw nothing there except resolve and compassion. Mr. Hale, her mother said softly, why are you helping us? You barely know us. Michael was quiet for a moment, carefully returning the papers to their tin box. Because it's right, he said simply, and because I've seen too many good people pushed off their land by men who care more for profit than justice. He stood, reaching for his coat. Don't lose heart. The railroad may think they have an easy victory here, but they're about to learn otherwise. At the door, he turned back. Keep that notice sealed for now. Make them wait while we search for the proof we need. His voice carried quiet authority. I give you my word. I won't let them win so easily. After he left, Gianna and her mother sat by the fire, the unopened envelope on the mantel above them. The lamp burned low, casting warm light against the frost-covered windows. Outside, the winter night pressed close around their small cabin. But somehow, with Michael's promise hanging in the air, it didn't feel quite so cold or dark as before. The pale winter sun had barely crested the eastern mountains when Michael led his horse from the small barn behind his cabin. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air as he carefully cinched the saddle, checking each strap twice. The 20-mile ride to the county seat would be challenging enough without equipment trouble. He'd packed his saddlebags the night before: dried beef, hard biscuits, and an extra blanket. The weather looked threatening, with heavy clouds gathering on the horizon. But there was no time to waste, not with the railroad's deadline hanging over the Haskins family. Leading his horse down the snowy trail toward their homestead, Michael rehearsed his plan. He knew the county office's filing system from his brief time working there years ago. If the deed existed, he would find it. The Haskins cabin came into view, smoke rising straight up from the chimney in the still morning air. As he approached, the door opened, and both women emerged onto the small porch. Mrs. Haskins wore a shawl pulled tight against the cold, her face drawn with worry. "Mr. Hale," she greeted him, her tone careful and measured. "We wanted to see you off, and thank you for doing this. Though I confess, I'm not sure why a stranger would take such trouble for us." Michael dismounted, leading his horse closer. "Ma'am, sometimes doing right is reason enough." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've seen what happens when good folks stand alone against men like these. It doesn't sit right with me." Mrs. Haskins nodded slowly, though her cautious expression remained. Years of frontier hardship had taught her to be wary of unexpected kindness. Still, she stepped forward and offered him a small package wrapped in cloth. "Some bread and cheese for your journey," she said. "It's not much, but it's more than enough." Michael interrupted gently. "Thank you." Gianna, who had been hanging back near the door, suddenly stepped forward. In her hands was something dark blue, a knitted wool scarf, simply made but neat and warm-looking. I made this," she said softly, holding it out. "For your ride. The wind gets awful cold up on the high trail." Michael took the scarf carefully, running his fingers over the even stitches. Such a simple gift. But the gesture touched him deeply. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had made something just for him. "This is fine work," he said, his voice rougher than usual. He wrapped it around his neck, noting how the wool blocked the bitter morning wind. "Thank you, Miss Gianna." A hint of color touched her cheeks, and she ducked her head, retreating back to stand beside her mother. Michael mounted up, settling into the saddle. "I'll ride as fast as conditions allow. With luck, I'll be back by nightfall." "God speed you safely, Mrs." Haskins said, and Gianna echoed softly, "Safe journey." The first few miles passed quickly enough, his horse's hooves finding solid footing beneath the shallow snow. But as they climbed higher into the foothills, the wind picked up, driving needle-sharp flurries into his face. Michael pulled Gianna's scarf higher, grateful for its protection. The trail narrowed, switching back and forth up the steep slopes. His horse labored through deepening drifts, steam rising from its flanks despite the cold. Twice they had to stop to rest, sheltering behind outcrops of wind-carved rock. By midday, they finally crested the pass. The county seat lay in the valley below, a cluster of wooden buildings around a proper courthouse of red brick. Michael led his tired horse carefully down the eastern slope, the footing treacherous on the ice-glazed trail. The county office was quiet when he entered, stamping snow from his boots. Only 2 clerks occupied the high desks, one elderly man who appeared to be dozing, and a younger fellow scratching away with a quill pen. "Help you?" the younger clerk asked without looking up. "Need to check some land claim records," Michael said. "From 1873. That got the clerk's attention. He peered at Michael over his wire-rimmed spectacles. "Mighty specific request. These records for yourself?" "Helping a neighbor," Michael replied evenly. "Widow and her daughter, railroads making claims on their land." The clerk's expression shifted subtly. He glanced at his sleeping colleague, then lowered his voice. "Lot of that happening lately. Railroad lawyers been in here almost daily, filing all sorts of documents." He stood, reaching for a ring of keys. "Follow me." He led Michael to a back room lined with shelf after shelf of leather-bound volumes and document boxes. 1873, you said? That would be. He ran his finger along a row of dates, selected a heavy book, and pulled it down. "Here's the main registry, but you might want to check those boxes too." He pointed to a stack in the corner. Some filings from that period got recorded separate, due to a change in the system. Michael nodded. "Much obliged." For the next several hours, he methodically worked his pride. way through dusty pages and crumbling documents. His eyes burned from straining to read faded ink in the dim light. But finally, in a bottom box of miscellaneous papers, he found it, the original deed to the Haskins land, properly filed and recorded. "Here," he said, calling the clerk over. "I need a certified copy of this." The clerk examined the document carefully, then nodded. "This is proper documentation, all right. Filed and witnessed according to territorial law." He carried it to his desk and began making a copy, adding his official seal and signature. As he worked, he spoke quietly. "Listen, friend. You should know, I've seen some mighty suspicious documents come through lately. Perfect copies of old forms, but with dates and names altered. Railroad's got friends in high places, if you take my meaning." "I understand," Michael said grimly. "But this will help. It's legal proof of prior claim. They can't just sweep it aside without raising questions." He handed over the certified copy. "Mind how you carry it. Paper's fragile in this weather." Michael tucked the precious document carefully inside his coat, close to his body. "Much obliged for your help." Outside, the afternoon was waning, the shadows already long across the snow. His horse had rested well in the livery stable, but the return journey would be harder, fighting against the wind that had blown fresh snow across their tracks. The ride back seemed endless. Darkness fell early, as it does in winter, and the temperature plummeted. Michael had to trust his horse to find the trail. The landscape transformed into shadowy shapes under the cloud-covered sky. The wind cut through his clothes despite the warm scarf, and his fingers grew numb on the reins. At the Haskins cabin, Gianna and her mother had finished their simple supper of beans and cornbread. They sat close to the fire, trying to pray but finding their thoughts constantly straying to Michael's safety. "The snow's getting worse, Mrs. Haskins fretted, peering out the frost-covered window. "We shouldn't have let him go. Not in this weather." "He'll make it back, Ma," Gianna said softly, though her own heart was heavy with worry. "We have to have faith." The hours crept by. They kept the fire well fed, and a lamp burning in the window, a beacon in the darkness. Finally, near 9 o'clock, they heard it, the muffled sound of hoofbeats approaching through the snow. Gianna reached the door first, pulling it open. Through the swirling flakes, a lantern light bobbed slowly closer. Then Michael's horse materialized from the darkness, frost coating its mane and flanks. Michael himself was little more than a shape of snow and ice, moving stiffly as he dismounted. "Thank the Lord," Mrs. Haskins breathed. "Quick, child, help him inside while I see to his horse." Gianna rushed forward to steady Michael as he stumbled slightly, his boots slipping on the icy ground. "You're frozen through," she gasped, feeling how cold he was even through his heavy coat. "Worth it," he managed through chattering teeth. Once inside, he stood before the fire, slowly regaining feeling in his extremities. Only when he could move his fingers properly did he reach inside his coat and withdraw a leather document case. "I found it," he said, his voice hoarse with cold and fatigue. "Your father's original deed, properly filed and witnessed. I have a certified copy here." Mrs. Haskins returned from the barn, took the case with trembling hands. She opened it carefully, scanning the formal language with tears in her eyes. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what we needed." She looked up at Michael, her usual reserve cracking. "I don't know how to thank you." Michael shook his head, accepting the cup of hot coffee Gianna pressed into his hands. "Don't thank me yet. The clerk warned me. The railroad's been filing forged documents, trying to override legitimate claims. This deed will help, but they won't give up without a fight." "But we have proof now," Gianna said. "Surely that counts for something?" "It counts," Michael agreed, warming his hands around the coffee cup. "It gives us a chance, at least. And sometimes, that's all folks need, just a chance to stand their ground." They sat together by the fire while Michael thawed out enough to eat the hot stew they'd kept warming for him. Outside, the wind moaned around the cabin corners, but inside was warm and almost peaceful. The precious deed lay on the mantel, representing a fragile hope, not just for keeping their land, but for proving that sometimes justice could prevail over greed if good people stood together. The morning dawned crisp and clear, winter sunlight sparkling off the fresh snow. Gianna wrapped her shawl tighter as she made her way to the chicken coop, carrying a bucket of feed. The hens clucked eagerly at her approach, their breath visible in small puffs of steam. "Here you go, ladies," she murmured, scattering golden corn across the frozen ground. The chickens bustled around her feet, pecking enthusiastically. Gianna smiled, watching them. These simple morning chores had always brought her peace, a reminder that some things stayed steady no matter what troubles came. From the corner of her eye, she caught movement. Michael was already at work by the broken fence line, his broad shoulders bent as he dug out the old post. He'd arrived just after sunrise, tools in hand, refusing any payment for his help. The steady rhythm of his work rang across the quiet morning, the thud of the post hole digger, the crack of wood being split for rails. Gianna finished with the chickens and gathered eggs from the nesting boxes, tucking them carefully in her apron. As she straightened, she paused to watch Michael work. There was something reassuring about his presence, like a mountain that had always been there but you'd only just noticed. He moved with quiet efficiency, each motion purposeful. He looked up, catching her eye, and offered a slight nod. Gianna felt her cheeks warm despite the cold air. She hurried inside with the eggs, where her mother was already stoking the cook stove. "That man's been out there since dawn," her mother said, glancing through the window. "Never known someone to work so hard for strangers." "Maybe we're not strangers anymore," Gianna suggested softly, placing the eggs in their wooden bowl. Her mother's face softened. "No, perhaps not." She squared her shoulders. "Well, he'll need a proper meal if he's working like that. Start peeling those potatoes, child." The morning passed peacefully. Gianna moved between indoor and outdoor chores, sometimes catching glimpses of Michael's progress. The broken fence was slowly transforming under his careful attention. By early afternoon, he had replaced the rotted post and was securing new rails. The peaceful rhythm of their day shattered at the sound of approaching horses. 3 riders appeared on the road, their mounts kicking up sprays of snow. Gianna's heart sank as she recognized the lead rider, the railroad foreman, his expensive coat and polished boots marking him as different from the rough-looking men who flanked him. Michael straightened from his work, standing very still as the riders approached. Gianna's mother emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was set in determined lines. The foreman reined his horse to a stop, looking down at them with poorly concealed disdain. "Mrs. Haskins," he said, touching the brim of his hat with false courtesy. "I've come with a generous offer." He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "Cash for your land, enough to set you up comfortable somewhere else." Gianna's mother lifted her chin. "We're not selling." The foreman's smile tightened. "Now, ma'am, be reasonable. This is good money I'm offering. More than this worn-out patch is worth." "The land's not for sale," Michael said quietly. "They have legal claim to it." The foreman's gaze shifted to Michael, taking in his work-worn clothes and scarred face. "This isn't your concern, mountain man. Best mind your own business." "These ladies are my business now," Michael replied, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. The foreman's face darkened. He turned back to Mrs. Haskins. "You're making a mistake, widow. Railroad's coming through whether you like it or not. Why make trouble for yourself?" His gaze slid to Gianna, and his lips curved in a cruel smile. "Not like you've got prospects here anyway, with nothing but this useless fat girl to help you. No man will marry her. You'll both end up in the poorhouse." Gianna felt the words like physical blows, each one striking deeper than the last. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. Michael moved so fast the foreman's horse shied backward. His hands were clenched into fists, his face tight with rage. "Get off this land," he growled, "before I forget my manners." The foreman's hand moved toward his gun, but Gianna rushed forward. "Michael, please." Her trembling hand found his arm. "Don't. He's not worth it." The tension crackled in the winter air. Michael's muscles were rigid under Gianna's touch, but he didn't move. The foreman looked between them, then threw back his head and laughed. "Well, well. Maybe she's found herself a protector after all. Though I can't imagine what you see in her, mountain man." He tucked the envelope back in his coat. You'll regret this, all of you. Railroad doesn't take kindly to being refused. He wheeled his horse around, his companions following. Their laughter drifted back on the cold wind as they rode away. Gianna held herself together until they were out of sight. Then she turned and fled into the cabin, unable to contain her tears any longer. She heard her mother call after her, but she couldn't stop. She just needed to be alone with her shame and hurt. The cabin's familiar interior blurred through her tears as she sank onto a Dakin.1 chair by the cold hearth. How many times had she endured such mockery? How many cruel words had she swallowed down? But somehow today felt worse, perhaps because Michael had witnessed it all. The door creaked open behind her. She quickly wiped her eyes, but couldn't quite steady her breathing. Gianna. Michael's voice was gentle, so different from the anger he'd shown earlier. Look at me, please. She turned reluctantly. He stood just inside the door, his tall frame blocking the light from outside. His face was troubled, but his eyes were kind. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so tired of it all. The pointing, the laughing, the cruel words. Sometimes I think they're right, that I'm nothing but a burden to Ma, that no one could ever. She couldn't finish. Michael crossed the room slowly, as if afraid of startling her. He knelt beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. Those men don't see what I see, he said quietly. They don't see your strength, the way you care for your mother, how gentle you are with every living thing. They don't see your courage, the courage it took to stop me today, to choose mercy over revenge. He paused, his scarred face earnest. That's true beauty, Gianna. Don't let anyone tell you different. Fresh tears spilled down Gianna's cheeks, but these felt different, cleansing somehow, like spring rain. Before she could respond, her mother appeared in the doorway. Supper's ready, she announced softly. Best eat while it's hot. They gathered around the table, the lamp casting warm light over their worried faces. The meal was simple, beans, cornbread, and the potatoes Gianna had peeled that morning, but no one seemed to have much appetite. Each was lost in their own thoughts, wondering what storm would come next. Michael ate slowly, his eyes often straying to the window as if expecting more trouble. Gianna's mother kept her hands busy, breaking her cornbread into smaller and smaller pieces, and Gianna found herself watching the lamplight flicker, casting shadows that danced across the walls like the uncertain future ahead of them. The quiet was heavy with unspoken fears, but there was something else there too, a sense of unity, of three people bound together by circumstance and choice, facing whatever came next as one. The railroad foreman's threats hung in the air like storm clouds, but they would weather it together. A week passed slowly, marked by cold mornings and watchful eyes. The railroad men hadn't returned, but their threats lingered like frost on window panes. Yet on this particular evening, something different stirred in Dry Creek. Lantern lights spilled from the white-painted church, drawing folks from miles around like moths to flame. Word of the revival meeting had spread across the valley. The circuit preacher had arrived, his saddlebags heavy with Bibles and his heart full of songs. Gianna stood before her small mirror, fingers trembling as she pinned her best dress collar. I don't know if I should go, she whispered to her mother. Everyone will be there. Her mother paused in smoothing her own Sunday dress. The Lord's house is for everyone, child. Besides, she added with a gentle smile, Michael offered to escort us. As if summoned by his name, a knock sounded at the door. Michael stood on the porch, his usual buckskins replaced by clean trousers and a pressed shirt. His scarred face softened when he saw Gianna. Ladies, he said, touching the brim of his hat. Evening's mighty fine for a walk to church. The trio made their way down the snowy path, their boots crunching in rhythm. Gianna kept her eyes down, conscious of every step. But Michael's steady presence beside her made the journey easier somehow. The little church glowed against the darkening sky, its windows warm with welcome. Inside, rough-hewn pews were already filling with neighbors. Gianna felt their glances as she entered. Some curious, some still holding traces of old mockery. She gripped her mother's arm tighter. They found seats near the middle, Michael taking the aisle spot like a guard. The wooden pew creaked beneath them as more folks squeezed in. Gianna could smell wood, smoke, and wool, soap and leather, all the familiar scents of frontier life gathered under one roof. The circuit preacher stood at the front, his threadbare coat neat, his Bible well worn. He had kind eyes that seemed to take in every face as he began the service. His voice filled the small space with words of hope and redemption. After the scripture reading, he smiled at his congregation. "Now, friends, let's lift our voices in praise. Who will start us off with Amazing Grace?" A heavy silence fell. Folks shifted in their seats, eyes down, no one wanting to be first. Gianna felt her mother's gentle nudge. "Go on," her mother whispered. "You know every verse by heart." Gianna's heart thundered. She couldn't. Not here. Not with everyone watching. But her mother's hand was insistent on her arm, and something deeper than fear stirred in her chest. Slowly, she rose. Her legs shook, but she forced herself to stand straight. In the stillness, she drew a breath and began to sing. The first note trembled, but then her voice found its strength. Clear and pure, it rose to the rough-beamed ceiling, filling every corner with melody. The words poured from her heart, each verse stronger than the last. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. The congregation sat stunned. Even the children were still, caught by the beauty flowing through their little church. Gianna kept her eyes closed, letting the familiar words carry her beyond her fear. "I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see." As she sang, something changed in the air. The usual whispers and judgmental glances melted away. Instead, faces softened. Some closed their eyes, swept up in the song. Others wiped tears from weathered cheeks. Through all the verses she sang, her voice never faltering. When the last note faded into holy silence, she opened her eyes to find every face turned toward her in wonder. The circuit preacher's voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. "Surely the Lord has blessed us this night. Thank you, Miss Haskins." Gianna sank back onto the pew, her cheeks burning. She felt Michael's arm brush hers as he shifted, and dared a glance at his face. What she saw there made her breath catch. Michael's eyes glistened in the lantern light, fixed on her with an expression of pure awe. He leaned close, his whisper meant for her alone. "I haven't heard anything so beautiful since my Sarah sang," he murmured. "Not since she was taken from me. I'd forgotten such beauty existed in this world." His words wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket. Gianna ducked her head, overwhelmed by the intensity of his gaze, but something bloomed inside her chest, a feeling too new and fragile to name. The rest of the service passed in a blur of hymns and prayers. When it ended, Gianna found herself surrounded by neighbors who had previously turned away. Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife who had often hurried past her in the store, clasped her hands warmly. "Child, why have you been hiding such a gift?" she asked. "You must sing for my daughter's wedding come spring." Others pressed close, offering kind words and smiles. Even some of the men who had laughed at her in the store looked ashamed, nodding respectfully as they passed. The walk home was different from any Gianna had known. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. Her mother walked ahead, carrying the lantern, while Michael stayed close to Gianna's side. "I never thought they'd look at me different," Gianna said softly. "I've been the same person all along." "Sometimes folks need their eyes opened," Michael replied. "Your song, it stirred something in me I thought was dead and buried." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It gave me hope, Gianna. Hope I haven't felt since I lost my Sarah." They walked in silence for a moment, their boots leaving parallel tracks in the snow. Gianna felt the weight of his words, the trust it took to speak of his loss. "Thank you for telling me about her," she whispered. Michael's hand found hers in the darkness, just for a moment, a brief, warm pressure that sent tingles up her arm. Then he released her, proper distance restored, but something had shifted between them. At the cabin door, Michael bid them goodnight with quiet courtesy. Gianna watched him disappear into the darkness, his broad shoulders fading like a dream. Inside, she helped her mother bank the fire and prepare for bed. But sleep felt impossible. She lay in her narrow bed, holding her hymnal close to her chest. Michael's words echoed in her mind. "Beautiful, hope, stirred something in me. For the first time in her life, Gianna felt truly seen, not for her size or her circumstances, but for the song in her soul. The same stars that had witnessed her shame now twinkled over a different girl, one who dared to believe she might be worthy of love after all. Her mother's steady breathing filled their small room, but Gianna remained awake, turning this new feeling over in her heart like a precious stone. She opened the hymnal, running her fingers over the well-worn pages. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. The railroad's threats still loomed. The future remained uncertain. But tonight, in the quiet dark, she let herself dream of possibilities she'd never dared imagine before. The morning after the revival meeting dawned clear and cold. Gianna rose early, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The kind words from neighbors still warmed her, giving her fresh energy as she tackled her morning chores. She hurried through feeding the chickens, scattering corn with practiced hands. Their excited clucking filled the crisp air as she worked. When she finished, she straightened her back and looked around the homestead with new eyes. Yes, the fence needed mending in places. The barn could use fresh boards. But it was their land, their home, and she would fight for it with everything she had. Michael arrived just as the sun cleared the eastern hills. He carried his tools, ready to help with the endless work a homestead required. Gianna's mother nodded at him from the doorway, her initial wariness softening into cautious acceptance. "The chicken coop needs strengthening before the next storm," Gianna told him, pointing to where winter winds had loosened boards. "I reckon we could use your help if you're willing." "Much obliged for the direction, Miss Gianna," Michael replied with a slight smile. He set to work, his strong hands making quick progress with the repairs. Gianna found herself watching him as she went about her tasks. His movements were sure and efficient, wasting no motion. When he caught her looking, she blushed and turned back to gathering eggs, but not before seeing the warmth in his eyes. Inside the cabin, her mother sat by the window, needle flashing as she mended clothes for townsfolk. It was honest work that brought in a little extra money, and her stitches were known to be the finest in the territory. "You're humming," her mother observed, glancing up from her sewing. Gianna hadn't realized she was. The hymn from last night still lived in her heart, making even the hardest work seem lighter. "I suppose I am," she admitted. Her mother's face softened. "It's good to hear you happy again, child." The peaceful routine of their days continued through the week. Michael came each morning to help with whatever needed doing, fixing fence posts, patching the roof, chopping wood for their dwindling pile. Gianna worked alongside him when she could, finding comfort in their shared silence. But their fragile peace shattered one bitter, cold morning, when hoofbeats announced the marshal's return. Gianna's heart sank as she watched him dismount, his expression grim beneath his badge. "Mrs. Haskins," he called, touching the brim of his hat. "Miss Gianna, I'm afraid I bring troubling news." They gathered in the cabin's main room, Michael standing protectively near the door. The marshal pulled papers from his coat, laying them on the rough wooden table. "The railroad has produced documents showing this land was sold 5 years ago," he said, his voice flat. "According to these papers, your husband signed over the deed before his death." "That's impossible." Gianna's mother shot to her feet, her face pale. "Thomas would never have sold our land. Never." Gianna felt the room spin. "We have the original deed," she protested. "Michael found it in the county records." The marshal shrugged, uncomfortable but unmoved. "These new documents look official. Whether they're genuine or not, I can't say. That's for a hearing to decide." Michael stepped forward, his jaw tight with anger. "You know damn well they're forged," he growled. "The railroad's been pulling this trick all along the line." "Watch your tone," the marshal warned. "My job is to enforce the law, not judge it. You'll have your chance to present your case at the hearing next week." After he rode away, a heavy silence fell over the cabin. Gianna's mother sank into her chair, her hands trembling as she clutched her apron. "What are we going to do?" Michael paced the small room like a caged mountain lion. "Fight them," he said firmly. "I've seen how they work, pushing honest folks off their land with false papers and threats. Not this time." The day passed in a haze of worry. Gianna went through her chores mechanically, her mind spinning with fear. As evening approached, Michael helped her bring in the last of the washing before the temperature dropped. "Stay for supper," she offered quietly. "Please." He nodded, following her inside. Her mother served a simple meal of beans and cornbread, but none of them had much appetite. Outside, snow began to fall, adding to the sense of isolation. After the dishes were cleared, Gianna's mother retired early, leaving them alone by the fire. Michael stared into the flames, his scarred face troubled in the flickering light. "I had a wife once," he said suddenly, his voice low. "Her name was Sarah. She was Apache." Gianna sat very still, sensing the weight of this confession. Michael rarely spoke of his past, and never of his personal life. "She was the most beautiful soul I ever knew," he continued. "Her people called her Morning Star. She taught me about healing plants, about reading the weather in the clouds. She showed me how to truly see the land, not just use it." His hands clenched in his lap. "She died in childbirth. The baby, too. I wasn't there. I was 2 days' ride away trading furs by the time I got back." His voice cracked. The medicine woman had done everything she could, but it wasn't enough. "Oh, Michael," Gianna whispered, her heart aching for his loss. "I couldn't bear to stay with her people after that. Couldn't bear to be around anyone. The mountains seemed the only place big enough to hold my grief." He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting firelight and old pain. "That's why I understand what this land means to you and your mother. It's not just property. It's memory and hope and future, all bound up together." Gianna found herself reaching out, touching his rough hand with gentle fingers. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "I'm so sorry you lost them both." He turned his hand over, briefly squeezing hers. "I've been alone a long time, thought that's all I deserved. But seeing you stand up to those railroad men, watching you find your courage to sing," he shook his head. "It woke something in me I thought was dead." Outside, the snow fell thicker, blanketing the world in white silence. Inside, the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls as they sat together, sharing the warmth. "I swear to you, Gianna," Michael said finally, his voice firm with conviction. "I won't let them take this land. I won't stand by and watch another family robbed of their dignity. Whatever it takes, we'll fight them together." Gianna looked at him, this scarred mountain man who had become their unexpected champion. His past held such deep wounds, yet here he was, willing to battle for their future. Something warm unfurled in her chest. Not quite hope, not quite love, but perhaps the beginning of both. The snow continued falling outside their window, each flake a tiny star in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now, they had this moment of understanding, this shared determination to stand against injustice. And somehow, that made all the difference. Dawn broke harsh and cold over the Haskins homestead. Frost glazed the window panes, and the morning chores left clouds of breath hanging in the bitter air. Michael arrived early, leading 2 horses, his own sturdy bay and a gentle mare borrowed from a neighboring farm. "Best we get an early start," he said, helping Gianna secure her woolen shawl. "Town's a fair piece, and daylight's precious this time of year." Gianna's mother stood in the doorway, worry etched on her face. "Mind your back before dark. Storm's brewing. I can feel it in my bones." "We'll be careful," Gianna promised, hugging her mother goodbye. Michael approached the mare, interlacing his fingers to make a step. "Here now," he said softly. "I'll give you a boost." Gianna hesitated, eyeing the horse's height. She'd only ridden a few times in her life, and never for such distance. I'm not sure I can." "You can," Michael said simply. His eyes held nothing but patience and confidence. Taking a deep breath, Gianna placed her boot in his cupped hands. With surprising grace, Michael lifted her, helping her settle into the saddle. Her thick winter skirts arranged themselves awkwardly, and she gripped the pommel with white-knuckled fingers. "That's it, Michael," encouraged, adjusting her stirrups. "Keep your back straight, and let your hips move with the horse. She's steady as they come." The first hour proved challenging. Every step of the horse sent jolts through Gianna's unused muscles. The cold wind cut through her layers, and she found herself hunching against it, making her seat even more precarious. Michael rode beside her, occasionally reaching over to correct her posture or offer quiet instruction. "Relax your shoulders," he'd say. "You're doing fine. Look ahead, not down." They passed the halfway point, the town still hidden behind the next rise. Gianna's thighs burned, and her hands were stiff from clutching the reins. A small whimper escaped her as the mare stumbled slightly on a frozen rut. Michael reined his horse closer. "Let's rest a spell," he suggested, guiding them toward a sheltered spot beneath some pine trees. He dismounted smoothly, then helped Gianna down. Her legs nearly buckled as they touched earth. "I'm sorry," she whispered, embarrassed by her weakness. "I'm slowing us down." Michael shook his head, producing a small flask of water and some dried beef from his saddlebag. "You're doing better than most first-time riders I've known," he said, offering her the provisions. "Takes courage to push through discomfort." They shared the simple meal in companionable silence, the horses pawing at patches of grass poking through the snow. Gianna felt her muscles gradually unknot, though she dreaded getting back in the saddle. "Tell me about your wife," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "What made you choose each other, when others might not have understood?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, running his thumb along the flask's metal rim. "Sarah had a way of seeing past surfaces," he said finally. "Past scars and differences. She'd say the heart knows its own truth, if we're brave enough to listen." The words settled deep in Gianna's chest, warming her more than the water had. When they mounted up, again, she found her seat with new determination. The rest of the ride passed more smoothly. Gianna began to feel the rhythm of the horse's movement, to trust the mare's sure-footedness. By the time the town's buildings came into view, she'd even managed a few moments of something close to grace. The lawyer's office occupied a narrow building between the mercantile and the telegraph office. Inside, the air was close and musty, heavy with the smell of old paper and wood smoke. Mr. Harrison, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, listened carefully as they presented their case. "The railroad's been particularly aggressive in this region," he said, examining the competing documents spread across his desk. "These new papers they've produced, the signatures, the dates, they're clever forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless." Hope flickered in Gianna's chest. "Then you can help us prove that?" The lawyer's expression grew grave. "Proving it is one matter. Fighting them in court is another entirely. The railroad has deep pockets and a team of attorneys in Denver. They'll drag proceedings out, file motion after motion, until most small landowners simply give up." "We won't give up," Michael said firmly. "No?" Harrison raised an eyebrow. "It could take months, even years. Every filing costs money. Every delay works in their favor. And even if you win, they might simply try another approach." Gianna felt the room spin slightly. She'd known it would be difficult, but hearing it laid out so starkly made her stomach clench. "What would you advise?" Michael asked, his voice steady. The lawyer removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. "Gather allies. The railroad's been doing this up and down the line. There must be others who've faced similar tactics. Document everything. Keep copies of all papers in multiple places. And," he hesitated, "pray for a miracle." They left the office with a heavy bundle of legal papers and even heavier hearts. The sun had passed, its peak casting long shadows across the snow-covered street. "The church," Gianna said suddenly. "Could we stop there before heading back?" Michael nodded, understanding in his eyes. They tied the horses at the hitching post and entered the small wooden building. The interior was cool and dim, smelling of pine boughs and lamp oil. The circuit preacher looked up from his Bible study, greeting them with genuine warmth. "Gianna, Michael, what brings you to town this bitter day?" They explained their situation, the preacher's face growing increasingly troubled. When they finished, he was silent for a long moment, thumbing through his well-worn Bible. "David faced Goliath with nothing but faith and a few smooth stones," he said finally. "Sometimes the Lord works through the most unlikely champions." He looked meaningfully at them both. "The railroad may have money and power, but they don't have righteousness on their side. We'll pray for guidance and justice." They knelt together in the empty church, the preacher's strong voice rising in supplication. Gianna felt tears slip down her cheeks as he asked for protection, for wisdom, for strength to endure the coming battle. "Don't face this alone," the preacher advised as they prepared to leave. "There are good people in this community who'll stand with you, if you let them. The railroad counts on folks feeling isolated, overwhelmed. But together, with faith and determination, even mountains can be moved." The ride home was slower, both from fatigue and the failing light. Gianna's entire body ached, and she could barely grip the reins. Michael kept close, watchful as the temperature dropped and the wind picked up. They reached the homestead just as the first snowflakes began to fall. Gianna's mother rushed out to help her daughter dismount, clucking worriedly at her exhausted state. "Get inside by the fire," she urged. "I've got stew keeping warm." But Michael caught Gianna's hands first, turning them palm up in the fading light. Angry red blisters had formed where the rains had rubbed, and her fingers were stiff with cold. "Let me tend these before you eat," he said softly. Inside, he worked with gentle efficiency, cleaning the raw spots with witch hazel and wrapping them in soft strips of clean cloth. Gianna watched his scarred hands move with such care over her own, and something tight in her chest began to loosen. "Thank you," she whispered, "not just for the bandaging." His eyes met hers, full of understanding. "You did well today, showed real grit." They shared a simple supper of bean stew and cornbread, the warmth of the cabin a blessed relief after the long day's cold. When the bowls were empty, they sat in silence for a moment, heads bowed in wordless prayer for the strength they'd need in the days ahead. Outside, snow continued to fall, coating the land in white silence. The railroad's threat loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. But in that moment, surrounded by firelight and family, Gianna felt a flicker of hope. Together, perhaps they could face whatever came next. Michael rose to leave, shrugging into his heavy coat. "I'll be back at first light," he promised. "We've got more work ahead, but we'll face it one day at a time." Gianna stood in the doorway, watching until his figure disappeared into the swirling snow. Her hands ached beneath their bandages, but her heart felt oddly light. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they wouldn't face them alone. The sharp February wind cut across the barnyard as Michael and Gianna worked to move fresh hay into the shelter. 5 days had passed since their journey to town, and a fragile routine had settled over the homestead. Though the threat of foreclosure still loomed, they found comfort in shared labor and quiet moments. "Much obliged for the help," Gianna said, adjusting her woolen shawl against the cold. Her blistered hands had begun to heal, leaving calluses that spoke of honest work. Michael nodded, hefting. "Another bundle. Least I can do. Your mama's cooking makes it worth the effort." A cloud of steam rose from his breath as he worked, his movements steady and sure. The morning light caught the silver threads in his dark hair, reminding Gianna that he carried his own weight of years and sorrows. The crunch of hooves on frozen ground drew their attention. 3 riders approached from the road, their horses' flanks lathered despite the cold. Gianna recognized the lead man as one of the railroad foreman's usual enforcers. Michael set down his hay fork slowly, positioning himself between Gianna and the approaching men. "Best get inside," he said quietly. "But, please, Gianna, go on now." She backed toward the cabin, her heart beginning to race. Through the window, she saw her mother look up from her mending, worry creasing her face. The riders dismounted, spreading out in a loose half-circle around Michael. Their leader, a burly man with a week's worth of stubble, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the snow. "Hear you've been causing trouble for the railroad," he drawled, filling folks' heads with nonsense about fighting progress. Michael's voice carried clearly across the yard. "If by trouble you mean helping honest folk keep what's rightfully theirs, then yes. Ain't nothing rightful about squatting on company land." The man took a step forward. "Time for you to move along, mountain man. This ain't your fight." "I reckon it is now." The first punch came without warning, but Michael was ready. He ducked the wild swing and landed a solid blow to his attacker's midsection. The man doubled over, cursing. The other 2 rushed in. Michael met them with grim determination, his years of solitary survival evident in every movement. He dropped one with a sharp right cross, but the third man caught him with a glancing blow to the temple. Gianna burst from the cabin, unable to watch helplessly any longer. "Stop it!" she cried. "Please, stop!" Michael's head snapped toward. Her voice, distracted for crucial seconds. The leader, recovered now, landed a heavy punch to his jaw. Michael staggered, then his expression darkened with dangerous fury. Something seemed to snap loose inside him. What followed happened so quickly Gianna could barely track the movements. Michael's fists became brutal instruments, striking with precision and power. Within moments, two of the men lay groaning in the snow, blood streaming from broken noses and split lips. The third scrambled backward, fumbling for his horse's reins. "Michael!" Gianna's voice cracked with desperation. "That's enough." He stood breathing heavily, his knuckles raw and bloodied. The rage slowly drained from his face as he looked at her, replaced by something like shame. Before anyone could speak, the thunder of approaching horses filled the air. The marshal and two deputies rode hard into the yard, rifles ready. "What's all this?" the marshal demanded, though his tone suggested he already knew. The railroad man who'd managed to stay mounted pointed at Michael. "He attacked us, nearly killed Thompson and Burke here. We was just delivering a message from the company, and he went crazy." Michael said nothing, his face set in hard lines. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye. "That's not true," Gianna protested. "They started it. They threatened him first." The marshal sighed heavily. "3 witnesses say different, Miss Haskins," and looking at the state of these men. He shook his head. "Michael Hale, you're under arrest for assault. We'll sort this out proper at the county jail." "No," Gianna started forward, but Michael's sharp look stopped her. "Stay back," he said quietly. "Take care of your mother. I'll be all right." One deputy dismounted to help the injured men onto their horses, while the other kept his rifle trained on Michael. The marshal produced a pair of iron handcuffs. Michael submitted to the restraints without resistance, though Gianna could see the tension in every line of howd. His body. The marshal helped him mount behind one of the deputies. "Michael, please," Gianna whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Don't leave us." He looked back at her, his expression softening for just a moment. "Keep faith," he said. Then the deputies spurred their horses, and the group moved away down the road, leaving only churned snow and spots of blood to mark what had happened. Gianna stood rooted to the spot, watching until they disappeared around the bend. Her mother's arms encircled her from behind, warm and steady. "Come inside, child," she murmured. "You'll catch your death out here." The cabin felt hollow without Michael's solid presence. Gianna moved through the evening chores mechanically, feeding chickens and stoking the fire. Her mother tried to coax her to eat, but food turned to ash in her mouth. As darkness fell, the empty chair by the hearth seemed to mock them. How quickly they'd grown used to having him there, sharing their simple meals, offering quiet strength. Now he sat in a cold cell while they faced an uncertain future alone. "What will we do, Mama?" Gianna's voice quavered in the lamplight. "The railroad won't stop now. And Michael." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Her mother gathered her close, as she had when Gianna was small. "We'll do what we've always done, daughter. We'll pray, and we'll trust the Lord to make a way." Gianna pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, drawing comfort from the familiar smell of soap and cotton. "It isn't fair. He was only trying to protect us." "I know, child. I know." Her mother stroked her hair gently. "That man has suffered much, but he chose to stand with us when he could have walked away. The Lord sees such things." They sat together as the fire burned low, sharing grief and worry in the growing darkness. Finally, her mother kissed her forehead and retired to her room, leaving Gianna alone with her thoughts. She lit a single lamp and knelt beside her bed, clasping her hands tightly. "Please, Lord," she whispered into the lonely silence. "Watch over Michael. Keep him safe in that jail cell. Guide us all through this valley of shadows." Her prayers continued, becoming more desperate as the night deepened. She begged for protection, for justice, for some sign that hope remained, but only silence answered. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her. She climbed into bed fully dressed, unable to face even the simple task of changing. The lamp burned steadily beside her, its small circle of light pushing back the pressing darkness. Sleep came in fits and starts, filled with troubled dreams. She saw Michael's face, heard the clink of handcuffs, felt the crushing weight of helplessness. The foreclosure date loomed in her mind like an executioner's axe, ready to fall. Through it all, one thought repeated. Would hope return with the dawn? Or had it been taken away in irons, along with the man who'd brought it into their lives? The lamp's flame flickered low, casting strange shadows on the walls. Gianna pulled her quilt tighter, feeling utterly alone in the vast Colorado night. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she would face it without their protector, their friend, their champion. She drifted into uneasy sleep as the lamp guttered out, leaving only starlight to pierce the darkness. The homestead stood silent under the winter sky, its fate hanging by threads of faith and prayer. The morning dawned gray and bitter, a steel-colored sky pressing down on the snowbound valley. Gianna stood at the cabin window, watching frost patterns creep across the glass. She had barely slept, her mind churning with worry for Michael and fear for their future. "The wagon's ready," her mother called softly from the doorway. "I've packed some bread and dried beef for you to take to him." Gianna nodded, pulling her heaviest shawl tight around her shoulders. The thought of seeing Michael behind bars made her stomach clench, but she couldn't bear leaving him alone there. Another day. The wagon creaked as she climbed up, the old boards frosted with morning rime. Their elderly mare, Penny, stamped her hooves against the cold, her breath coming in white clouds. Gianna gathered the reins with trembling hands. "Be careful," her mother said, pressing a small Bible into her coat pocket. "The road's treacherous with ice." "I will, Mama." Gianna leaned down to kiss her mother's weathered cheek. "I'll be back before dark." The journey into town was slow and lonely. Penny picked her way carefully through frozen ruts, while Gianna huddled beneath a woolen blanket. The empty seat beside her seemed to mock her with Michael's absence. How different this felt from their ride together just days ago, when his quiet strength had given her courage. The sun had climbed halfway to noon, when Dry Creek's buildings finally came into view. Few people moved on the streets, most seeking shelter from the biting wind. Gianna guided the wagon toward the squat stone building that served as the town jail. Her boots crunched on packed snow as she approached the heavy wooden door. A deputy looked up from his desk as she entered, recognition crossing his face. "Miss Haskins," he said, not unkindly. "Come to see Mr. Hale?" "Yes, sir." She clutched the food bundle tighter. "If I may." He nodded, retrieving a ring of keys. "Follow me. 10 minutes. That's all." The cell block was dim and cold, smelling of iron and damp stone. Michael sat on a narrow cot, his broad shoulders hunched against the chill. He looked up at their footsteps, and Gianna's heart clenched at the purple bruising along his jaw. "Gianna." He stood quickly, moving to the bars. "You shouldn't have risked the journey in this weather." "I had to come." Her voice wavered as she took in his condition. A crude bandage covered the cut above his eye, and his knuckles were raw and swollen. The deputy unlocked a small hatch in the door. "You can pass things through here. I'll be at my desk." When his footsteps faded, Gianna pushed the bundle of food through the opening. "Mama sent this. Are they treating you all right?" "Well enough." Michael's fingers brushed hers as he took the package. "I'm more worried about you and your mother. Has the railroad made any more trouble?" "Not yet." She wrapped her hands around the cold iron bars. "Michael, I'm so sorry. If I hadn't distracted you during the fight." "No." His voice was firm but gentle. "Don't blame yourself. I lost control of my temper. Been too long living wild, I reckon. Should have handled it different." Tears pricked at her eyes. "What are we going to do? The hearing's in 2 weeks, and without you." "Listen to me." Michael stepped closer, his face serious. "You're stronger than you know, Gianna. Don't give up hope. The Lord ain't finished with this story yet." She nodded, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "I've been praying. Seems like that's all I can do anymore." Prayer ain't small thing. His scarred hand covered hers on the bars. "Keep faith. Truth has a way of coming to light." "Time's up, Miss Haskins." The deputy's voice echoed from the front room. "I'll come back soon as I can," Gianna promised, reluctantly stepping back. "Take care on that road." Michael's eyes were worried. "God go with you, Gianna." She hurried out, passing the deputy with a murmured thank you. The cold air outside stung her tear-stained cheeks as she made her way back to the wagon. Lost in troubled thoughts, she nearly collided with a man on the boardwalk. "Oh, excuse me, I'm so sorry." "No harm done." The voice was calm and dignified. She looked up to see a native man regarding her thoughtfully. Though his clothes were plain frontier wear, he carried himself with quiet authority. "You are Miss Haskins?" he asked. "The one whose land the railroad claims." She nodded warily, but something in his manner put her at ease. "Yes, sir. I'm Gianna Haskins." "I am Henry Nez." He touched his hat respectfully. "Michael Hale is an old friend. I heard of his arrest and came to town hoping to help." Gianna studied him with new interest. "You know Michael?" "Many years." A shadow crossed his face. "I knew his wife, before she was called home. He is a good man who has known much sorrow." "He's been so kind to us," Gianna said softly, standing against the railroad when he didn't have to. Henry nodded. "That is his way, but perhaps I can help now. You see, I once worked as a clerk at the Indian Agency, studying railroad law and treaties. I learned much about how they take land and how they can be stopped." Hope flickered in Gianna's chest. "The railroad produced a deed they claim proves we sold the land years ago, but it's forged. We know it is." "Ah." Henry's dark eyes sharpened. "Yes, this is a common tactic, but such forgeries can be proved false if someone with knowledge of their methods will testify." "Would you?" Gianna caught his sleeve earnestly. "Would you speak at the hearing?" He was silent for a moment, considering. It would not be easy. Many here distrust Apache words in white courts, but for Michael's sake, and because it is right, yes, I will testify. "Thank you," she breathed. "Oh, thank you." "But," she hesitated, "I should speak with my mother first. She's cautious about trusting an Indian?" His smile held no bitterness. "That is wise of her, in these times. Go, speak with her. I will be at the boarding house if you wish to discuss this further." Gianna hurried to Penny and the wagon, her mind racing with new possibilities. The return journey seemed faster, hope lending wings to the mare's tired hooves. Her mother was hanging wash despite the cold when Gianna pulled into the yard. She listened gravely as Gianna recounted her visit with Michael and the unexpected meeting with Henry Nez. "An Apache?" Her mother's hands stilled on the damp sheet. "In court?" "I don't know, Gianna. But Mama, he studied the law. He knows how the railroad operates, how they forge documents. And he's Michael's friend. He knew Michael's wife." Her mother was quiet for a long moment, the wind snapping the sheets around them. "It's a fearsome thing, to trust our fate to a stranger. And an Indian." She sighed. "But then, we trusted Michael, didn't we? And he proved true. Henry seems just as honorable," Gianna said softly. "Maybe the Lord sent him to help us, like he sent Michael." "Perhaps." Her mother gathered the last sheet into her basket. "Well, we've precious little choice now. If he's willing to testify, we'd be fools to refuse." Relief flooded through Gianna. "I'll ride back tomorrow, talk to him about the hearing." That evening, after chores were done, Gianna sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, deeds, tax receipts, letters from her father before his death. Her mother had kept everything, tucked away in an old cigar box. The lamp cast a warm circle of light as she sorted through the documents, her heart lifting whenever she recognized her father's careful handwriting. Surely here was proof of their rightful claim, proof that could save their home. "Lord," she whispered, smoothing a yellowed receipt, "guide us through this battle. Help us find the truth that will bring justice." Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside, the flame of hope burned steadier than it had in days. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, Gianna let herself believe that perhaps Michael was right. The Lord wasn't finished with their story yet. She carefully tied the papers into bundles with faded ribbon, tucking them safely away for the morning. The battle ahead would be hard, but they weren't fighting alone anymore. Between Michael's courage, Henry's knowledge, and her own growing determination, perhaps they stood a chance against the railroad's greed after all. Dawn had barely touched the eastern sky when Gianna climbed onto the wagon seat beside Henry Nez. Her mother stood in the doorway, shawl pulled tight against the Keimston biting wind. "Be careful," she called. "The road will be treacherous with all this snow." "We will return before full dark," Henry assured her, gathering the reins. "Your daughter will be safe with me." The wagon creaked as they set out, runners cutting fresh tracks in the powder. Gianna huddled deeper into her coat, grateful for the hot bricks wrapped in burlap at their feet. The morning was brutally cold, their breath forming white clouds in the frozen air. For the first hour, they rode in companionable silence. The steady rhythm of the horses' hooves and the soft shush of runners through snow created a peaceful melody. But as the sun climbed higher, Henry began to speak, his voice carrying clearly despite the wind. "The railroad men, they have done this before," he said, adjusting the reins in his gloved hands. "Not just to settler families like yours. Many of my people lost their hunting grounds the same way." Gianna turned to study his profile, noting the deep lines around his eyes. "Through forged documents?" "Yes, and through fear." His jaw tightened. They would threaten the elderly, the widows, those they thought could not fight back. They would file false claims, present deeds with marks that were not made by our leaders. "That's terrible," Gianna whispered. "Didn't anyone try to stop them?" "Some did, but courts rarely listen to Indian testimony." He glanced at her. "That is why your case interests me. Perhaps through helping you we can expose their methods, show how they prey on the vulnerable." The wagon hit a deep rut, jolting them both. Henry steadied the team before continuing. "You are brave to stand against them, Miss Haskins. Many would have taken their money and fled. This land was my father's dream," she said softly. "He worked himself to death to keep it. I can't let them steal it with lies." Henry nodded approvingly. "You have a warrior's heart. My wife would have liked you." "Your wife?" Gianna asked carefully, noting the past tense. "She walked on 5 winters ago. Fever took her and our young son." His voice remained steady, but grief shadowed his eyes. "She too believed in fighting injustice, no matter the cost." "I'm so sorry," Gianna murmured. Now she understood better the bond between Henry and Michael. Both men carried deep losses. They traveled on, the sun climbing higher, as Henry shared stories of other land disputes he had witnessed during his time as a clerk. He explained how the railroad often used multiple forged documents, each supporting the other's false claims. "They are clever in their deception," he said, "but they make mistakes. Small things, wrong dates, mismatched signatures. If we study the records carefully enough, we will find their errors." By midday, they reached the county seat. The courthouse loomed ahead, its red brick walls stark against the snow. Henry helped Gianna down from the wagon, then gathered their folders of documents. Inside, the clerk's office was warm but dusty. Stacks of leather-bound record books lined the walls, and the air smelled of ink and old paper. The clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, eyed Henry suspiciously until Gianna explained their purpose. "We need to examine all land transfers recorded for Section 23 in the past 5 years, she said firmly, trying to project confidence she didn't quite feel. The clerk shuffled through several books before laying them out on a scarred wooden table. "You can look, but don't remove any pages," he warned before returning to his desk. Henry began methodically examining the records, his finger tracing each line of text. Gianna watched in fascination as he compared signatures, dates, and official stamps. "Look here," he murmured after nearly an hour. "This deed the railroad presented? See how the signature slopes differently from your father's true mark on the original land grant?" Gianna leaned closer, squinting at the pages. "You're right, and the way he wrote his middle initial is wrong too. More than that." Henry pulled out another document. The notary seal they used, it's dated 1973. But this same notary's commission expired in 1972. He could not have witnessed this signing. Excitement flickered in Gianna's chest. "Can we prove that?" "Yes. The county keeps records of all notary commissions." Henry's dark eyes gleamed. This is the kind of mistake arrogant men make. They do not expect anyone to look so closely. They spent the next several hours gathering evidence, carefully copying dates and details into their own notebooks. Henry showed her how to properly word an affidavit, explaining which points would carry the most weight in court. The winter sun was already low when they finally finished. The clerk had long since gone home, leaving them to work by lamplight. Gianna's eyes ached from straining at the faded handwriting, but her heart was lighter than it had been in weeks. Loading their precious documents into the wagon, they began the long journey home. The temperature had dropped further, and clouds threatened more snow. But Henry kept them both alert by sharing stories of his people's traditions and beliefs. "Among my tribe, women are highly respected," he said, as they passed a frozen creek. "They are the keepers of our culture, the teachers of our children. Their strength holds our families together." "Really?" Gianna asked, surprised. "In town it seems like women are only valued if they're pretty or rich or both." "That is the white man's way." Henry's voice held a hint of sadness. "My people see deeper. We value wisdom, courage, kindness. These are true measures of beauty." He glanced at her kindly. "You remind me of our women, Miss Haskins. Standing strong against those who would harm your family, speaking truth in the face of power." Gianna felt her cheeks warm despite the cold. No one except Michael had ever spoken of her with such respect. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means a great deal." The rest of the journey passed quietly as darkness settled over the land. Henry proved skilled at navigating by starlight, keeping them steady on the rutted road. Gianna found herself dozing, lulled by the wagon's motion and exhausted from the day's work. She startled awake as they pulled into her yard. A lamp burned in the kitchen window, and her mother hurried out to meet them. "Thank heaven you're back safe. I've been worried sick with this weather turning." "We found what we needed, Mama," Gianna said as Henry helped her down. Her legs were stiff from sitting so long. "Henry showed me proof the railroad's papers are forged." Inside the warm kitchen, over cups of steaming coffee, they spread out their findings. Henry explained each document carefully, pointing out the discrepancies they had discovered. "The notary seal alone should be enough to challenge their claim," he said. "But combined with the mismatched signatures and incorrect dates, we have a strong case." Gianna's mother studied the papers, her face thoughtful. "You truly believe this can save our land?" "If the judge is honest, yes." Henry's voice was confident. "The railroad has been careless, thinking no one would examine their work so carefully. They did not count on your daughter's determination." "Or your knowledge," Gianna added quietly. "We couldn't have found this without you." Her mother's expression softened as she looked at Henry. "We're grateful for your help, truly. I know it cannot be easy, involving yourself in white folks' troubles. Justice knows no color, Mrs. Haskins." Henry touched his hat respectfully. "I am honored to assist." He gathered his coat, preparing to leave. "I will return tomorrow to help prepare our court presentation. The hearing is in 4 days. We must be ready." After he left, Gianna and her mother sat long at the kitchen table, reviewing their newfound evidence. The lamp cast warm shadows on the wall, as hope began to take root in both their hearts. "I never thought I'd say this," her mother admitted softly, "but the Lord does work in mysterious ways, sending us help through Michael, and now Henry. He does." Gianna carefully tied their precious documents together. "Henry said something today about seeing deeper than the surface. Maybe that's what God's been teaching us all along." Her mother reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Maybe so, daughter, maybe so." Dawn broke cold and clear over the county courthouse. Frost etched delicate patterns on the windows as townsfolk filed into the cramped courtroom, their boots squeaking against the wooden floor. Gianna sat rigid on a hard bench beside her mother, both women dressed in their Sunday best despite the worn spots and careful mending. Henry Nez stood near them, his bearing dignified in a clean black suit. In his hands, he held a leather portfolio containing their precious evidence. The morning light streaming through tall windows caught the silver in his dark hair, and his expression remained calm despite the suspicious glances from others in the gallery. "Lord, give us strength," Gianna's mother whispered, clutching her daughter's hand. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and coal smoke from the pot-bellied stove in the corner. More townspeople crowded in, some out of genuine interest, others merely seeking entertainment on a cold morning. The railroad foreman sat near the front, smugly confident in his fine wool coat. 2 lawyers flanked him, their briefcases bulging with documents. They barely glanced at Gianna's family, as if the outcome was already decided. A door opened, and the bailiff led Michael in. Gianna's heart clenched at the sight of him. Though he stood straight-backed and proud, his face bore fresh bruises, and he moved stiffly. Their eyes met across the room, and she tried to pour all her support into that single look. A ghost of a smile touched his lips before he was directed to sit. "All rise," the bailiff called. "The Honorable Judge William Preston presiding." The judge entered, his black robes sweeping behind him. He was an older man with steel-gray hair and deep-set eyes that surveyed the crowded room before he took his seat. "Be seated," he commanded. "We're here regarding 2 matters. The assault charges against Michael Hale and the disputed land claim of the Haskins family. As these issues appear connected, we'll address them together." He shuffled through some papers. "Mr. Hale, you're charged with attacking 2 railroad employees. How do you plead?" Michael stood. "Not guilty, Your Honor. I was defending myself and the Haskins property from trespassers." "Objection." One of the railroad lawyers cut in smoothly. "The land in question legally belongs to the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad Company, as our documentation shows." The judge raised an eyebrow. "We'll get to that. First, let's hear the prosecution's case regarding the assault." The railroad's lawyer rose, straightening his vest. "Your Honor, Mr. Hale viciously attacked 2 of our workers who were merely surveying company property. They required medical attention, and one lost 2 teeth." He produced a document. "We have signed statements from Dr. Morrison confirming their injuries." "The land ain't theirs to survey," Michael interrupted, his voice tight with anger. "Mr. Hale," the judge warned, "you'll have your turn to speak." He turned back to the lawyer. "Continue." "Furthermore," the lawyer went on, "Mr. Hale has a history of violent behavior. He's well known as a loner who refuses to integrate into proper society. We request maximum penalties for this unprovoked attack." Gianna's fingers tightened around the bench edge. She wanted to shout out the truth that the railroad men had come looking for trouble, that they'd threatened her family. But she forced herself to wait, remembering Henry's careful coaching about court procedure. The judge turned to Michael. "What's your response to these charges?" Michael stood again, squaring his shoulders. "Those men came armed, Your Honor. They'd already threatened Miss Haskins and her mother. When they started pushing me around, I defended myself. Nothing more. Can anyone corroborate this version of events?" "I can," Gianna said clearly, rising before she could lose her nerve. The courtroom fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "I saw everything. Those men came looking for trouble, trying to frighten us off our land." The judge studied her thoughtfully. "Very well. Now, regarding the Land Dispute Council, present your evidence of ownership." The railroad lawyer stepped forward eagerly, producing a thick sheaf of papers. "Your Honor, we have here a properly executed deed of sale, signed by the late Mr. Haskins 3 years ago, transferring all rights to the railroad company." He handed the documents to the judge. "Everything is in order, with witnesses and notary seal." "Objection!" Henry's voice rang out clear and strong. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as he stepped forward. Some people shifted uncomfortably. An Apache man addressing the court was unprecedented. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "State your name and connection to this case." "Henry Nez, Your Honor. I worked as a clerk at the Territorial Land Office for 7 years. I've studied these documents extensively, and I can prove they're forgeries." More whispers filled the room. The railroad lawyer's face darkened. "Your Honor, this person has no standing here. We object to—" "I'll hear him out," the judge interrupted firmly. "Mr. Nez, proceed." Henry opened his portfolio and approached the bench, his movements deliberate and dignified. "First, Your Honor, examine the notary seal on their deed. It's dated 1873, but I have official records showing that particular notary's commission expired in 1872. He produced a document. He could not have witnessed this signing. The judge leaned. Forward. Comparing the papers carefully. Continue. Additionally, compare Mr. Haskin's signature on the railroad's deed to his authentic signature on the original land grant. Henry laid out both documents. Note the different slope of the letters, the formation of his middle initial. These were clearly written by different hands. The railroad lawyer jumped up. This is preposterous. We won't stand here and let some Indian... Counsel, the judge cut in sharply. One more outburst like that and I'll hold you in contempt. Mr. Nez is presenting relevant evidence, and you will show appropriate respect to this court. Gianna felt a surge of pride as Henry continued methodically laying out their case. He cited territorial statutes, explained filing procedures, and pointed out multiple discrepancies in the railroad's documents. His quiet expertise was impossible to dismiss. The railroad foreman's face had grown increasingly red as Henry spoke. When he whispered urgently to his lawyers, Gianna could see beads of sweat on his forehead. Finally, she could stay silent no longer. Rising from her seat, she stepped forward. Your Honor, may I speak? The judge nodded, and Gianna took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. That land has been in my family for 15 years. My father worked himself to death clearing it, building our home. It's not just property to us, it's sacred ground where he's buried. Her voice grew stronger. Mr. Nez understands that better than most. His people know what it means to have land stolen through false papers and broken promises. We're not asking for special treatment, just justice. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Gianna remained standing, her heart pounding but her gaze steady. She could feel Michael watching her, and Henry's quiet presence gave her strength. The judge studied the documents before him for several long moments. Finally, he looked up. I find sufficient cause for concern regarding the legitimacy of these land transfer documents. I hereby order a full investigation into their authenticity, and all foreclosure proceedings are stayed pending the results. He turned to Michael. As for the assault charges, given the questionable nature of the railroad's claim to the property, and evidence that their employees were the aggressors, I'm dismissing the case. Mr. Hale, you're free to go. Relief flooded through Gianna as the bailiff removed Michael's handcuffs. The railroad lawyers huddled with the foreman, their faces dark with anger, but she barely noticed them. Michael made his way to where she stood with Henry and her mother. Thank you, he said quietly, looking between them. All of you. We're not finished, Henry reminded them. The railroad won't give up easily, but we've won this round. Gianna's mother touched Henry's arm hesitantly. We can never repay what you've done for us. Your daughter spoke truth, Henry replied. Sacred land should be defended, no matter who holds it. He gathered his papers carefully. I'll begin preparing documents for the investigation tomorrow. Together, they walked out of the courthouse into the crisp morning air. The sun had climbed higher, making the snow sparkle like scattered diamonds. Though uncertainty still lay ahead, Gianna felt hope warming her heart as surely as sunlight warmed her face. Michael fell into step beside her as they headed toward their wagon. His bruises looked painful in the bright light, but his eyes were clear and determined when they met hers. Your courage in there, he said softly. Standing up, speaking out. It was something to see. Gianna ducked her head, feeling her cheeks warm despite the cold. I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the bravest thing we can do. He helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hand lingering on hers for a moment. The courthouse clock struck 10 as they started home, its clear tones ringing across the snow-covered street. They had won a reprieve, but Gianna knew the real fight was just beginning. Still, glancing at Michael beside her and Henry following on his horse, she felt stronger than she ever had before. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Back at the homestead, Michael threw himself into work with renewed purpose. The sight of Gianna's courage in court had stirred something deep within him. He mended loose boards and cleared snow from paths, his muscles aching but his heart lighter. Days stretched into a week as they prepared for the coming trial. In the small parlor, Gianna and Henry pored over documents spread across the wooden table, their heads bent close as they worked. Michael would pause in his outdoor tasks to watch through the window, struck by their dedication. Each evening, he knelt by his bed, offering quiet prayers of gratitude. The simple act reminded him of faith long forgotten in his years of solitude. One particularly cold evening, Gianna invited Henry to stay for supper. Steam rose from bowls of thick stew as Michael turned to their ally. "Much obliged for all you've done," he said, his voice rough with sincerity. Henry nodded, understanding in his dark eyes. Word spread through town about their alliance with an Apache man. Whispers followed Gianna at church, but she held her head high, unashamed of their friendship. When the storm hit, it came with sudden fury. Heavy snow sealed them inside, windows rattling against howling wind. By lamplight, Michael and Gianna shared stories of their pasts. She spoke of dreams for a family of her own. He admitted his longing to belong somewhere again. As evening deepened, Gianna began humming her hymn, the gentle notes rising above the storm's rage. Michael watched her, seeing not just strength now, but grace. Something tender bloomed in his heart as the blizzard raged outside their warm shelter. Morning light sparkled on fresh snow as the storm's fury mellowed to calm. Michael saddled his horse, determined to replenish their dwindling supplies. "I'll return before sundown," he promised Gianna, who stood wrapped in her shawl by the door. In town, hostile glares met him at the general store. Railroad men huddled near the potbelly stove, their voices carrying. "Haskins' place is good as claimed," one sneered. "Ain't nothing gonna save it now." Michael's jaw tightened as he gathered flour and coffee, hurrying back to warn Gianna. Her face paled at the news, but determination sparked in her eyes. "Let them talk," she said firmly. "This land is ours." As evening approached, wagon wheels crunched in the yard. Neighbors began arriving, some bearing concerned looks, others skeptical frowns. Gianna moved with quiet grace, pouring steaming coffee into tin cups. Her mother watched from her chair, pride shining in her weathered face as Gianna answered pointed questions about their legal fight with unwavering dignity. Later, as embers glowed in the hearth, Michael and Gianna sat alone at the kitchen table. "I'm scared of letting you down," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "The Lord won't forsake us," Gianna answered softly. Their hands met across the wooden surface, lingering in shared warmth. Michael stepped out into the crisp night air, his boots crunching on fresh snow. Above, stars glittered like diamonds on black velvet. He lifted his face to their cold light, making a silent vow to protect the woman whose courage had captured his heart. The morning of the trial dawned clear and cold. Wagons and riders crowded the courthouse square, their breath frosting in the winter air. Inside, every wooden bench creaked under the weight of townsfolk who'd come to witness the Haskins fight. Railroad lawyers in fine suits exchanged smug glances as Henry Nez approached the judge's bench. His voice rang steady and clear as he presented document after document. "These signatures, Your Honor, bear identical pen strokes, clear evidence of tracing." He laid out papers showing dates that couldn't match, pointing to ink that hadn't existed when the supposed deeds were signed. Gianna rose next, her hands trembling but her voice strong. "We will not be driven from our land by lies and threats," she declared, feeling Michael's supportive presence behind her. "This home is our heritage, given to us by God's grace." The judge studied the evidence carefully, his weathered face grave. When he struck his gavel, declaring the railroad's claim fraudulent and hereby void, the courtroom erupted. Cheers and whoops filled the air as friends rushed to embrace the family. Railroad men stormed out, faces dark with fury. Gianna turned and fell into Michael's waiting arms, tears of joy streaming down her face. That evening, lantern lights spilled from every window of the Haskins cabin as neighbors arrived bearing dishes and good wishes. Laughter rang out as folks shared stories and broke bread together. Gianna moved among them, serving pie and accepting congratulations, her heart full. At last, she belonged. The little church glowed with morning sunlight that Sunday as townsfolk filed into creaking pews. Gianna sat between her mother and Michael, her heart light with victory and peace. When testimony time came, she rose without hesitation, her voice carrying clear and pure through the rafters. The hymn spoke of grace renewed, of mercies fresh as morning dew. Even the hardest heart softened at the beauty of her song. As the last note faded, Michael stood unexpectedly. His scarred hands gripped the pew before him as he faced the congregation. "Folks," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I came to these mountains years ago, running from grief. Loneliness ate at my soul until I forgot what hope felt like." He turned to Gianna, his eyes glistening. "Then this precious woman showed me God's mercy still lives. Her courage, her kindness, her faith, they brought me back to life." Gianna's breath caught as Michael stepped closer. "Not long ago, she declared no man wanted her." His voice grew tender. "Well, I do. I want her for my wife, my heart, and my forever." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the church. Tears streamed down Gianna's cheeks as she gazed up at him. "I never believed such love was possible," she whispered. When Michael gathered her into his arms, the congregation burst into applause and joyful tears. Their embrace, witnessed by neighbors and blessed by God, sealed a promise born of struggle and crowned with grace. The bitter chill of winter gradually yielded to spring's gentle touch. Tender green shoots pushed through melting snow around the Haskins homestead, matching the new life blooming within its walls. The sound of Michael's hammer rang out across the yard as he reinforced loose boards and mended weathered fences. Inside, Gianna's cooking filled the cabin with warmth and savory aromas that drew appreciative smiles from her mother. Neighbors dropped by regularly now, bringing wedding gifts and helping hands. The women gathered to stitch Gianna's wedding dress, their needles flashing in the lamplight as they shared stories and laughter. Even the general store owner, once cold, offered fabric at a discount, his gruff manner softened by the change in town's heart. Henry became a frequent visitor, his quiet dignity and wisdom welcomed at their table. He taught Gianna Apache words for family and blessing, while she shared her mother's recipes for sopapillas. Michael watched their easy friendship with grateful eyes, remembering how his first wife would have cherished such acceptance. One evening, after the dishes were cleared and Henry had ridden home, Michael took Gianna's hand. "Come watch the sunset with me," he whispered. They stepped out onto the porch, where the fading light painted the snow-capped peaks in hues of rose and gold. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and early wildflowers. Michael's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close. "You make me believe in home again," he murmured, against her hair. The words settled deep in Gianna's heart, sweeter than any song. She leaned into his embrace, remembering that bitter day in the general store when she had declared no man would want her. How wrong she had been. God had seen her true worth all along, had been preparing this path of love and healing. From inside the cabin, lamplight spilled warm and golden across the threshold. Gianna's voice lifted in a quiet hymn, the melody carrying peace across the evening air. Her mother's harmonies joined in, followed by Michael's deeper tones. Together they sang, their voices weaving like the threads of their new family, once broken, now restored, shining whole in the gathering dusk. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.